Hello and welcome to my build showcase video for Crackling Lance on Surfcaster. Everything I will be discussing in this video is under the context of the Phrecia League softcore trade. Also, this is under the context of progression and or the economy of day 1 through day 5 of the league, when all this footage was primarily recorded. This build has been extremely fun to play and is currently carrying me through in-game progression very comfortably, on a relatively tame budget. This build excels at single target DPS while also having very good clear. This build applies very large instances of 100% cold damage to your enemies at extremely fast cast speeds, which ensures that anything you touch that has the capability of being frozen will be, and everything else that cannot be frozen but can be chilled will be effortlessly chilled to your maximum effect immediately and throughout the remainder of the fight. So let me lay out the structure of this video and what you can expect. First, I will go over a summarized breakdown of 4 major categories that describe a build, which are intended to give you a brief understanding of what this build will feel like to play should you choose to do so. I call this the 4 pillars of a good build. After that, I will discuss in detail how exactly this build functions, what items are important or strictly required, and how the spells we are using function together, as well as explanation of the skill tree and why exactly we choose the ascendancies that we have, keeping several tiers of budgets in mind. All of these sections are timestamped with chapters in the video, so if you would like, you could skip right ahead to whatever specific information you're looking for. But without further ado, let's crack straight into it. Starting with the 4 pillars of a good build: boss killing, clearing, survivability, and playstyle comfortability. Starting off with boss killing, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. Excellent. This build packs a huge punch. With a low investment, straight out of the campaign, you can very quickly break into the 1 million DPS category, and through relatively easy to purchase or craft upgrades, you can eventually reach 5 to 8+ million DPS, and I'll go very much into detail about how to do that. But for this particular section, I would just like to stress on the fact that this skill, while scaled correctly and played on a Surfcaster, can be incredibly powerful. We deal 100% cold damage and very high instances of it with very fast cast speed. This means that we are freezing or applying very powerful chills immediately. This provides an incredibly large quality of life for bossing or killing those giga-juiced rare mobs. It's also important to note that I'm using a single curse and a frost bomb for exposure. These are 2 very easy buttons to press when I want to do the most damage as possible. And that's all we have to do the most damage as possible. Frost bomb is nice to have in situations where we also just want to functionally disable the enemy's life regen. So the whole point of me talking about these 2 buttons we click is just to explain that we don't really have to do anything. We just sort of hit a couple buttons with an extremely fast cast speed, and then we just start beaming, and that's about it. The skill's AoE coverage is also very good for bossing. If the enemy is anywhere on your screen, you're able to hit it because of the distance of the beam, and the damage does not drop off or change in any way based on where exactly the enemy is within the beam. The skill also has really good tracking, which means once you lock on, essentially, once you click the boss for the first time and you just hold down the skill, your beam will continue to track the boss like an aimbot, and it works out pretty well for a lot of different fights. I would have given this build a perfect 10 out of 10, however, there's 2 things that I should mention, which are both, when put together, enough to bring it down to a 9 out of 10. Firstly, Crackling Lance is a hard casting spell. This means that you're only ever doing damage if you are currently casting. So you have to remain stationary while you are doing so, of course. This is a pretty common problem amongst a lot of other skills in the game, so it's not really fair to bring it down a whole point just because of this. However, when combined with the second reason, it makes a bit more sense. And that second reason is simply that we are not very tanky. We are definitely not squishy, but I would be lying if I said I didn't suffer a handful of one-shots from time to time while fighting difficult enemies. This is mostly because our skill tree focuses primarily on damage over survivability, and we are scaling evasion, energy shield, and life. The end result is a life pool, something in the ballpark of 4,500 to 5,500 with about as much investment as I put into it. And we don't really have room for any defensive auras. I did opt in for Vitality, however. But for the point of this build score, just know that we are not really considered tanky, and that's okay. Path of Exile 1 gives you 6 portals that are actually there for a reason. Hooray! So with all this being said, I've still managed to get to level 97 without much of a problem so far, and I see myself more than likely pushing to 99, maybe even 100 within the next few days. Anyways, I've gone on a bit of a tangent here. This build is really good at bossing. Let's move on. The second pillar I want to talk about is the clearing. I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. Once again, an excellent score. Crackling Lance's beam goes very far forward, but it doesn't have very good girth, if you will. So why is this build getting an excellent rating for clearing then? The answer is freeze, and more importantly, Herald of Ice explosions. We take a bit of AoE in this build, and we take some points on the tree to support our heralds, so they end up becoming pretty impactful. Herald of Ice is exactly what is carrying us through clearing. All it takes is a single cast of Crackling Lance into a pack of enemies, and they're all instantly frozen and shattered when they die, exploding damage onto nearby enemies. This is also the reason why I've opted to not go for Impulse's Broken Heart, because the explosions from Herald of Ice feel totally fine, and we don't really want to sacrifice the body armor slot. Impulses is a pretty bad body armor when it comes to defenses, and you can, nowadays with the new Atlas bases that exist, you can craft some extremely defensive rare body armors, and you can also get those really nice implicits, of course. The other component that makes this build good at clearing is simply the fact that we are very fast. This build has a fair amount of movement speed, as well as, of course, comboing that with the illegal fisherman possessed spirit that we get from one of our ascendancies. This is affecting us at all times, no matter what, so it's basically like we're just wearing 2 boots. It's pretty insane. I will say that even though this build is very fast, and has very good ice explosions, and freezes everything instantly, there's definitely still some builds out there that do these things a little bit better. So I'm not really comfortable giving it anything higher than a 9, but I think a 9 is still a very good score. Okay, moving on to survivability. This is gonna have to get a 5 out of 10. It's mediocre. It's not good, it's not bad. This is obviously the pain point of the build. The one part about it which kind of brings everything into perspective, makes it all make sense, why is this allowed, basically. And in order to make Crackling Lance work and to feel playable, we kind of have to go into this basically, ignoring most typical forms of the necessary in-game PoE defenses. We get what we can, and we make good use of what we can, but we don't really have any significant sources of like plus max resistance. We only have like 4,000 to 5,000 life. Our energy shield is doing nothing for our defense because we have Eldritch Battery. We don't take any defensive keystones. We aren't focusing on block at all. We're using a fishing rod. We cannot fit in something like Petrified Blood. So all these things combined makes us pretty squishy on paper. But what we do have is, of course, we have 100% spell suppression, pretty easily, by the way, with an extra 6% prevented, which is nice. And we have a decent but not great amount of evasion, simply because evasion is the most efficient type of defense to grab with our position on the skill tree. Armor would just take more investment and it would be probably worse. I'm using Steel Skin as a guard skill, which helps out a little bit, but arguably the most important, and yes, this is not a joke, the most important defensive layer that we do have is Freeze. Okay, hear me out. While mapping, at least, the fact that we are easily freezing everything right away helps us basically avoid all direct damage from monsters completely. If we can click the screen correctly, like if we don't make a mistake on our gameplay, then we only really need to worry about ground effects or like damage over time, that kind of a thing. And for that, I've opted into fitting in a high level vitality, which helps out a lot. And I have, of course, a nicely rolled life flask. So it ends up just basically being enough life regen to offset most of the harsh damage over time effects. And it's also enough to completely ignore a lot of the light damage over time effects, like, for example, Caustic Ground. We have capped Chaos Res, and because we have Vitality and Leech, not even Leech, just because of Vitality, we can just stand on Caustic Ground. It does nothing to us. So that's just one example. I think that's really all I want to say here. In practice, it feels a lot better than it looks on paper, but technically, the defenses are not great. Therefore, I'm only giving this a very conservative 5 out of 10 score. So now let's discuss the Playstyle Comfortability. Basically, this category is meant to explain how does this feel to play. And I'm being serious here. I'm not kidding around. This is a 10 out of 10.
Perfect!
I've actually never given a build a 10 out of 10 on anything before, and I think this is very deserving of a 10 out of 10. This skill is by far the most satisfying I've ever played, and this could of course be personal preference, but it's just so much fun. There's something so special about casting a massive beam of energy so fast that deals millions of damage and instantly freezes everything it touches. It's just the best thing ever. I'm allowing myself to inflate the overall score a bit by giving this a perfect 10 out of 10, just because I am enjoying this build really all that much, seriously. So with that being said, what's the end result? The average score comes out to 8.25 out of 10, which is very good. It's a high, very good rating. I think this is definitely a fair rating for a few other reasons, which I will elaborate on later. An 8+ score for this build feels right because this build feels great and is very fun to play, but it does have its occasional weak moments from time to time. So for this next section of the video, it's time to talk about the functionality of the build. And I'll start off by saying that it's actually pretty simple to understand at the end of it, but seriously, there actually is a lot going on behind the scenes that I will explain on how to scale this gym into the stratosphere. Okay, so because we are a Surfcaster, we are using a fishing rod. This is giving us 50% more cast speed, and all of our hits are guaranteed critical strikes. This is kind of the keystone of the build here. These two nodes are really what is making this skill shine, but it goes even deeper than that. This basically means that we can scale our cast speed to enormous amounts, which allows us to fire the skill very, very fast, and we are able to benefit from the critical strikes. Meanwhile, we can completely ignore having to get any sort of critical strike chance in our build, because we're guaranteed to crit no matter what. Every hit, not even with Crackling Lance, but also with our Heralds, are all critical strikes. So we're focusing on scaling our crit multiplier, and that ends up becoming like one of our biggest pieces of the pie, so to speak, of how to get the most damage. It's not the only thing, we're taking the other node, the other ascendancy, which gives us 100% of our lightning damage converted to cold damage, because obviously Crackling Lance is a lightning spell, but we are actually doing only cold damage. But then normally when you would do this, if you convert all of your damage, you would miss out on whatever sort of ailment you apply before the conversion. However, with this ascendancy, it says that our cold damage can shock. It's basically like giving us two alleyways of scaling here. And obviously I've talked a lot about freezing so far, but the same can be said about shock. We are not only applying our maximum effect of chill and freeze, we are also applying our maximum effect of shock instantly on anything that we touch. It's pretty amazing. So one of the best ways to scale crit multiplier is to use Maraline's Fallacy. It is one of the strongest critical strike oriented items in the game. It's only tier 3 rarity, which means it's actually not that rare, but it is rare enough to be expensive on the first day or so. But it will quickly fall in price. And sure enough, as I record this, it's currently 35 chaos for a standard priced Maraline's. There is a pretty big range of the rolls, which matter a lot. So a decently or good rolled Maraline's is like 1 divine right now, which for the power that this amulet brings to the build, it is certainly worth it. And of course, do not forget to apply catalysts to your Maraline's. It makes a massive difference when you scale that big number into an even bigger number based on the percentage, 20% crit, whatever. You get the point. The other reason why this amulet is just ultra bis is because this amulet is typically balanced with the downside less critical strike chance, and that basically this amulet is giving you a lot of crit multi for the trade-off of needing to invest a lot more into crit chance to offset because that's a less mod. That's like the opposite of a more multiplier. So that kind of like really kills your crit chance on any crit related build. But of course we have guaranteed critical strikes, so we are completely negating this downside. And also this amulet gives us some free culling strike, which is super nice. Okay, so there's something else that's really important. There's, other than critical strikes, other than cast speed, there's something else that's making the skill really pop off, and yeah, it's that thing that's in the title of the video and in the thumbnail. You're probably wondering about, like, one link. You know, I use the word, or I use the term one link. This spell has no support gems. Like, what does that even mean? Well, you're damn right it has no support gems, brother. Look at this beaut of a helmet right here. The Crest of Desire. Oh boy, this thing is a real unit, let me tell you. This is a heist unique, which I've heard is pretty rare. I wouldn't know. I don't have fun running my face into a door every 5 seconds. But anyways, let's just take a look at this item. What does this item do? So it has one socket, and it gives +8 to socketed skill gems, and it gives up to 50% quality to socketed skill gems, and it gives socketed skills deal double damage. So the reason why this works so well is simply because Crackling Lance gains a very large amount of power from gem levels, and it also gains a very large amount of power from quality. So a level 21 20% quality Crackling Lance gets bumped all the way up to level 29, and with this particular roll I have on my helmet, it ends up getting 69% more, nice by the way, damage with hits per intensity. Okay, well we have 4 intensity. Very easily. We get 4 intensity just from this mastery right here. And we build our intensity very fast because we're casting very fast. So we basically have 4 intensity the whole time, and this gives us a grand total of 276% more damage with hits. Okay, so let's really break all of this down. Let's really digest what I just said. We have a very high base damage skill that is level 29, that is dealing 276% more damage with hits, and then we doubled it, and we are always critically striking, so we doubled it again basically, and we are casting about this fast. I mean, that's basically it. How much do I really have to say about a one link spell, right? Okay, so for the next section of the build, you know, we've covered the functionality. That's really all there is to it, how it works exactly. So now let's talk about the skill tree. I'm going to go start from the very beginning all the way through the skill tree, and then we're going to go over every piece of gear and how I got the gear, what you can search for, and how to maybe craft it yourself. Before I really begin, I'm just going to go ahead and explain that I got the basis, I got the skeleton, if you will, of this tree from Sir Gog. Sir Gog basically was talking about doing this kind of a build with this Crest of the Desire unique and Crackling Lance. This was his league starter, but his idea was more of a auto bomber. He was going to eventually try to scale the heralds instead of scaling Crackling Lance. So I don't know how he's doing with that right now. I don't think he's really posted an update as of right now. But I decided to not scale the heralds. And instead, I started to really enjoy the play style. I enjoyed the feel of the Crackling Lance itself. So I really wanted to just take that and run with it. So this build is more or less his build with the skill tree, I should say. But I made a few different decisions here and there. So I'm going to talk about that, okay? So basically, the number one thing we're trying to focus on here is getting as much cast speed, crit multi, and we're coming up here to both of the lightning wheel and cold wheel because this is all just really good power. But for like leveling, when you start out, you're gonna want to go through here and take these LE damage nodes and then come straight down and get Harrier. You want to rush Harrier because this gives you movement speed, and you'll be able to get this way before you get to the first lab. And the first lab is of course going to be Ghosts of the Deep, which gives you more movement speed, of course. So that just makes leveling amazing, having 35% movement speed without even equipping your boots yet, right? So that's insane. And the other reason why Harrier is good is obviously cast speed, but also because it puts you in this area right here where you can use this really good unnatural instinct position. Now, of course, this is an expensive jewel. It's 6 divines right now, so it's not necessary. It's just really good. It's really strong, but it's nice to be in the ballpark. It's nice to be in the neighborhood for when you eventually get to the point of wanting to purchase yourself the Unnatural Instinct. This is giving us 34% spell damage, 9% cast speed, 8% life. It's giving us life per enemy killed, which is actually pretty nice to have. It's giving us, did I say movement speed? It's giving us reduced mana cost of link skills. That's great. And then a little bit of dex and intelligence. But so basically, the power of this jewel is the cast speed, the life, the mana per or life per kill, and the spell damage. To be honest, I've had builds that have used this exact position of a Natural Instinct and have gotten a lot more value out of it. But so it's really not that necessary. I would say don't focus on getting yourself one of these. Wait until you can comfortably afford it to do so. Okay. But coming down here, this is really important. This wheel gives us a ton of spell suppression and evasion. Initially, I started off by getting all of these nodes, except for this one, obviously. This one doesn't really do anything. So you take all these nodes, it helps you get spell suppression capped very quickly, very easily. And then eventually, if you get yourself some decent gear that has a lot of spell suppression on it, you can unspec some of these. And then the evasion rating that you lose from this can be easily regained from this wheel. This gives you 12%, and then it gives you 24%, which is actually the same total that I'm losing from what I took off here. Okay, I didn't have all these spec'd actually. I had 3 of these 4 spec'd. Anyways, this also is going to give you a bunch of free resistance, which is nice, and 1% max cold, which is kind of nice. And it's nice to have the evasion masteries as well. Every piece of gear I have has evasion, which means I can make use of the 15% spell suppression mastery, which is really nice to have. That's a very large chunk of basically 1 skill point. It's worth it for sure. Okay. And then you can use the other evasion mastery, which is really nice, giving you 100% increased from your body armor, which is going to be your biggest piece of evasion. This body armor looks pretty decent. It has some really good mods, some really good rolls, but it's actually not a very good base. It's only a Torturer garb. It's not the Bis, I think, necrotic armor or whatever. This actually is the next in line for an upgrade. I will craft one myself. So I'm only getting 1500 evasion, which I've seen body armors that have like 2000 plus, 2500 plus. So this mastery could have way more value than I currently am getting, which I'll worry about that in the future. We are, of course, taking the reservation efficiency notable. That's very important. We're also getting non-curse aura effect, which is really good. And from this reservation mastery, we are getting the 8% damage for every aura or herald. We have a total of 5 auras and heralds. We have Vitality, Period of Elements, Herald of Ice, Wrath, and Herald of Thunder. So that's giving us 40% damage, which is good. This particular mastery is never good if you only have like 2 auras, but it becomes good once you have 5, or maybe 3 or 4 is technically good, whatever. So this is a strong point as well. I'll talk about the other reservation we have up here as well later when we get up there. But from this particular area, we are also taking Magebane. So yeah, so Magebane is giving a lot. Based on the dexterity that I have, it's giving 13%. So unfortunately, until I get some really good gear, I can't unspec this. If I unspec this, I would get a lot of evasion, because Magebane is converting the dexterity bonus to spell suppression instead of evasion. So it would be very beneficial to get to a point where I can unspec this, but for now I have it, okay? Sentinel's really good. 10% all res, 24% evasion. It's a great notable, but we will eventually climb our way up into here, because this is another very good jewel socket. It ends up making the Light of Meaning to be really powerful in this particular location. So if we come into POB, we can see that if I add a % cold damage Light of Meaning to my build, it's giving me 2 million DPS, which is absolutely crazy. The reason why this is so good is because the way that Light of Meaning works is everything within this circle that we have allocated is also giving us 6% cold damage. So this is 6, this is 6, this is 6. It even works for keystones. And because we have an Unnatural Instinct, it is actually including everything within the unnatural instinct, or within the cross section of these two circles. So it's like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's like so many different points here that are also giving 6% cold res. So the really cool thing about this is all of these points that are giving me useless stats are actually now, like accuracy and attack speed, these are actually now giving me cold damage as well. So it's like ultra value. And I know what you're probably thinking, hey, if that is that good, if it's really giving you 2 million DPS, then why have you not spent or respect 3 points anywhere else on your tree to get this earlier? I have a really good answer for that. I am fucking stupid. And I did not realize how good it was until about 10 minutes ago. Did not know that it is actually this insane. I didn't consider the unnatural instinct working its way into this calculation too. I think that's crazy. And what I have planned to do about this is I am going to unspec these 4 nodes right here, because on this particular section, these 4 nodes are a little bit weaker than these 4 nodes, and it doesn't look like it is on NPOB. For example, if you can see right here, I have 10.1 million. If I spec this and unspec this, it looks like I have more with the left side. But the way that shock works, in POB that is, it doesn't ever impact the calculation for DPS if you get the increased effect of lightning ailments. And the reason why is because shock has a maximum effect of 50%, and there might be a way to increase that, but with a standard shock in POB, but in game you do not immediately reach 50%. You have to do a certain threshold of damage, which we do a lot of damage, so we do get there pretty quickly. But we have overshock, which gives us 40% increased effect of lightning ailments, and we have breath of lightning, which gets that to 90% increased effect. So basically we are getting double the value, or close to it, close to double the value of our shock for every hit we do, which means we ramp to 50% a lot, like 50% maximum effective shock. We ramp to that a lot quicker than if we had this allocated instead. And the ramping that we get from this is a lot better than 200,000 DPS. It ends up making our kill times a lot quicker because we are able to ramp to the maximum DPS within only like 2 or 3 casts, as a, you know, instead of like 7 or so, right? So it ends up making it's basically, you can think of it as like a coal that is at the beginning of the fight. Okay, it's like we get an extra 10% damage at the start, and then we get to 90% and we coal at the end as well. It's like a second coal for the beginning, which is pretty interesting way to think about it, I think. So yeah, my plan is basically to unspec these 4 points here, and I'm gonna use 3 points to get Light of Meaning, and then I'm going to put 1 more point into this exposure mastery, which ends up giving a little bit more than if I were to just keep 1 point here. That's basically the plan. And yeah, there's not a lot of other good options. What I could do is, if I'm just strictly doing bossing and only bossing, I could go for the crit mastery that gives me 25% crit multi to unique enemies. That's a little bit better. Might be worth to swap in if you're doing some boss, like, you know, long sessions of bossing. But I'm gonna keep it like this for now, and this is the new official setup for level 97, that is. So one suggestion I would have is that before you can afford the Unnatural Instinct, I would say that you should not even come to this jewel socket, because it's 3 points, so it's not that efficient for a jewel socket. So before you can buy this, it's not really worth to buy the Light of Meaning. So then I would just unspec this. I would take Harrier, I would take Sentinel, and then I would put those points elsewhere, and I would keep this setup right here until you could get the Unnatural Instinct plus Light of Meaning. Moving to the right, we have Revenge of the Hunted. It is just a very good notable because we're scaling life and evasion rating, so these 3 are just, you know, very valuable. Unfortunately, the 10% spell suppression while on full life is kind of like a dead stat. You never want to you know, have this be what gets you to 100. Down here, of course, we're taking all of these because they're amazing. We're getting the 3% prevented from Innervate, and we're also getting 3% prevented from the Mastery. So, once again, just good. Now, let's go upwards. Okay, we get a socket here because it's just, you know, 2 points, easy. This is extremely important. So, these two nodes give us 3% cast speed. It also gives us crit chance, which is obviously doing nothing for us. We don't care about crit chance, we care about crit multiplier. But we're getting a little bit of cast speed, and then we come up here, we get crit multiplier, which is great. We get 8% cast speed, which is really great. But more importantly, we have the caster mastery. This is the only caster wheel we're taking, and this is giving us the +1 to maximum intensity. So essentially, because of what I said earlier, where we have 69% more damage with hits per intensity, this is giving us 69% more damage. Okay, pretty insane, notable right there. Let's go up here to more crit. Pretty easy to understand why this is good. It's a lot of crit multi. Coming to the right, now there's a few options here. We do also come along this side, so you can actually connect this, but I didn't want to do that for skill point pressure reasons. So I just came here quickly, and the reason why is because this is actually really strong. Snowforged is very good. So we're getting 8% cold damage, total of 24% cold damage up to this point, and then 49 totaled up to Snowforged. The fire damage is obviously doing nothing, but the fact that we also then have -5% to elemental resistance, it means we are basically 5% penetration for free, because we're always chilling, obviously. So this is a lot of cold damage, and it's a easy 5% penetration, which is excellent. Coming up here, we have obviously the large cluster jewel socket, and I'll be honest with you, I bought this super early and I never looked back. There might be some better notables to get on a cluster jewel, but this one was really cheap and it's all pretty good. AoE is nice to have, elemental damage obviously good. This is strong, 5% or 8% extra is great, and 30% lightning damage, and a bigger increased effect of shock. Yeah, you can see Hunter Chaos, it's not necessarily that expensive, and you could probably swap one of these out for something else and get yourself a cheaper or more available cluster. And we're taking every point except for one to get both jewel sockets. The thing about our jewels is we have a lot of options, actually. We can get a lot of different versions of crit multiplier. We can get crit multiplier with lightning skills. We can get crit multiplier with elemental skills. We can get global crit multiplier. And you want to probably focus on getting that alongside life. Pretty important. This build does struggle a little bit to get up to a comfortable amount of life. So I would say I would definitely focus on getting % increased life on your jewels no matter what. And if you don't want to get the crit multi, that's fine. You can just get any other version of increased damage. You have area damage, which works, by the way. This skill is considered to be an area damage skill. You can get cold damage, you can get lightning damage, you can get spell damage, and that's also a good time to talk about Eldritch Battery. So the thing about this skill is we cast really fast, okay? If you take a look at my mana, or in other words, my energy shield, you can see that it actually is slightly going down. I'm just holding the cast, I'm casting it a bunch of times, right? This is an unrealistic thing. You're never gonna get below half in a normal mapping scenario, because the way Eldritch Battery works is when you take damage, the energy shield does not protect your life like it normally will, okay? So that means that your energy shield recharge will never be stopped because you're never taking damage. According to your energy shield, you're never taking damage. So it's essentially like we have mana regen, like a crazy amount of mana regen. However, you need to have a specific number, you need to have a specific amount of energy shield for the recharge to be, you know, it'll also depend on your cast speed. If you cast a little bit slower, maybe you don't need that much. But I found that the number was like about 700. Once I got above 700 energy shield, I was able to very comfortably cast, because also keep in mind, I don't have my flask on right now. There's a few other things that can happen in a map where you occasionally will cast a lot faster, you know, if you collect a shrine or whatever. So sometimes I do cast a lot faster, and sometimes my mana does drain a lot more. But with about 700, which I have found this to be more than enough. And if you are struggling to sustain your mana,
or your energy shield mana, you can very easily come over here real quick and grab some leech, some spell damage, leech as energy shield, and then get Light Eater. It's kind of impossible to do this with mana. So then we come down for influence for more mana preservation efficiency and more increased effect. Increased effect of non-curse auras for this particular build is a good stat, but it's not very good because our only aura, we have 2 auras that this is actually affecting, which is Wrath. I'm sorry, we have 3. Wrath, Vitality, and Purity of Elements. Okay. Obviously we have 2 other buffs. We have Herald of Ice and Herald of Lightning, but those are not auras technically, so they have no benefit from the increased effect. So basically, these notables are giving us a little bit of DPS from increasing Wrath, a little bit of resistance from increasing Period of Elements, and a little bit of life regen. But it's not actually that much. So for that reason, I'm not getting the typical thing that you will see on like every expensive body armor, rare body armor. A lot of them like to go for that 15% increased effect of non-curse auras on the implicit. I'm getting crit multi. It takes up the same slot, you get crit multi for spell damage, and it ends up being way more DPS. And then we can finish off with some defenses. So some life, some energy shield. This helps us cast our spells, and the life helps us not die, right? So we're also gonna come down here to the right and get this wheel. Not necessarily because these are good points, they are. I mean, they give us evasion rating, they give us some energy shield, which is nice. But the most important thing is the mastery. So this mastery is really good because the downside of this mastery is the fact that it makes your dexterity give you no more evasion rating, and it turns it into evasion rating from intelligence. However, because we already have Magebane, our dexterity is already no longer giving us evasion rating. Our intelligence is not only giving us the standard energy shield benefit, it's also giving us evasion rating as if it was dexterity. The combo between these 2 points is really, really strong. Now, moving up to the left side of the top row here, and then we can come down for another very quick 2-point jewel socket where I have my Watcher's Eye. This Watcher's Eye is surprisingly affordable. You're not going to get any better rare jewel, maybe a crazy crit multi-jewel, but the fact that you have 56% increased lightning damage and you have life, mana, energy shield, this is excellent. This is a very, very good Watcher's Eye just with that one line alone, and that single line is going to be 1, maybe 2 divines. So as far as Watcher's Eyes are concerned, this is one of those like bottom of the barrel affordable Watcher's Eyes. And then if you eventually can find yourself, maybe you get one with like horrible rolls. Hold on. The Vitality mod that gives you Leech. What I would do is I would set up a live search. When people unidentify a Watcher's Eye, or they see these 2 mods, they're definitely not going to think that it's that good, right? You know, you have Leech, Vitality, not a very good one. You have increased lightning damage, which is good, but it's not insane. It's nothing like, you know, the damage over time multiplier things, or, you know, the crazy Period of Elements stuff or whatever, right? So they might just go ahead and price check this, like, oh, okay, let's see what we got here. 50, 70, 100. Like, they're probably not going to be super enthused when they unidentify this Watcher's Eye. So you can probably set up a live search and snipe these 2 mods for maybe 1, maybe 2 divines. I imagine that's pretty possible. To finish up here, we just have obviously life and resistance. You know, it's just very, very good. 3 points for this. It gives us 16% life, 5% to all elemental resistances. Pretty nice to have this in the build. Let's talk about the gear. Okay, now the gearing is actually quite simple. And with all things considered, it's actually very simple. You have a fishing rod. Okay, let's talk about the fishing rod. Right now, a standard fishing rod with nothing considered, because the only thing that matters is cast speed, is looking to be about 1.8 to 2 divines. Okay. In my opinion, I don't think it's worth to buy a fishing rod, and here's why. Unless you just have the money and you don't care, right? But while you're leveling this build, in Act 8, you can find yourself the Gimling Legionnaires in the Grain Gate. The Gemling Legionnaires are like a group of 5 or 6 enemies, and they are all individually considered to be a unique enemy. The reason why that's important is because when you equip the Fairgrave's Tricorn, a unique helmet, and then you kill a unique enemy, you have a chance to drop a fishing rod. And I'm not sure if we know what chance it is, but it feels like something maybe in the ballpark of 0.5 to 1% chance. So essentially the strat is, you know, while you're leveling, your Crackling Lance is probably going to be a 4-link with like faster casting. I don't even know what else. I think I did lightning penetration and then maybe added lightning damage or something. Alongside your first ascendancy into your second, eventually you get the conversion. And then once you have your fishing rod, you're going to go for the fishing rod points. But you can farm your fishing rod with just your 2 ascendancies and like a 4-link Crackling Lance, and you basically reset the instance of the Grain Gate. And you kill the Gemling Legionnaires over and over and over again. So you drop a fishing rod, you use one of them, and you just split it. It costs 18 chaos to split, and then you sell the split copy for 2 divines, okay? So it's essentially like you're getting a 4 divine value with the current prices, because you're farming it, using it for free, and then selling a split copy. Okay, so that's the first obvious point of the gear to talk about. The second is the Crest of Desire. Like I said, this is a heist unique, and I hate heist. Maybe you like heist, and maybe you want to farm it yourself through heist. That's totally fine. I don't want to do that. So what I ended up doing was actually purchasing it early in the league, and I bought it exactly how it is right now. It is nearly perfect. It rolls from 5 to 8 on the Socketed Gems, and this is very important, okay? If you take a look at my skill, let's say I have a +7 roll. So basically I do a -1 here. This is giving me, right now, almost exactly 1 million DPS. If you take a look at this right here, if I go down 1 level, I'm losing 1 million DPS. If I go down 2 levels, I'm losing like another 900k. If I go down another one, you know, the gem levels are very important on Crackling Lance. So I would say that you should focus big time. You should focus on getting yourself a +8. And the issue is that they are kind of expensive. Because the Crest of the Desire is so rare in heist, it is expensive. And some people are catching on that this is a good unique. So they're using, you know, they're actually using it now. I bought it for 2 div. How it is exactly, which is crazy because it also has a really good roll here. That's another thing, is that the quality can go from 30 to 50. And that makes a really big deal because this is juicing one of the big axes of scaling the damage, which is the more damage with hits per intensity. So basically, I can just show you again, and very, very easily. If I remove some quality here, you can see 2% quality is giving me 1% damage, basically. The other big ticket item that I've already talked a lot about is the Maraline's Fallacy. Like I said, it's extremely bis. I don't really need to go much more in detail about this, but it is currently a 40 chaos, 35 chaos amulet. And then all you really got to do is maybe spend a little bit more money if you want to get one with some nice rolls. Okay, so I have a 235, 235% to global crit multi for only 100 chaos. So the prices have come down significantly. So yeah, I mean, this amulet is just insane. Very affordable, very strong. Okay, moving on to the rings. These rings are where I am getting most of my chaos resistance. I opted for Amethyst base. If you're able to find a lot of chaos resistance elsewhere in your build, I would say probably look for a Vermilion base. You know, obviously if you need resistance, get a 2-stone or whatever. You know, it's not necessary. If you want to save some money, you can get yourself just a very standard, you know, generic ring for like 50 chaos or whatever, with a bunch of resistance and a bunch of life. But yeah, I would focus on getting life as much as possible. You can see I have both of these rings with a tier 1 life roll, and I have them both catalyst to be 20% life. So I have 132 here, I have 136 here with 52 strength. So this ring is actually giving me 162 life. So the rings are where we are focusing on life and chaos res and any other res we need. And then everything else is just a little bit of an extra bonus. So for this one, I have rarity as an extra bonus. For this one, I have cast speed as an extra bonus. Somewhere in your build, either on your rings, your belt, or your boots, you are going to have to get strength. You can also get it, if you have a Stygian Vice, you can get it on your Abyss Jewel as well. That helps a little bit. You can technically get it on your normal jewels. You can get strength on these guys too if you really need to. But I would say focus on getting a good 50 plus roll to strength on one of your rings, because you're going to need to get at least, let's take a look in POB. You're going to eventually need to get it to 100 plus if you want to use something like Vitality or Steel Skin, okay? You can technically function without Steel Skin, you can technically function without Vitality, and then you can forego the strength roll on your rings. But I would suggest that you really consider using Vitality. It helps out a lot. Talking about the belt. So if you're working with a budget, you don't have to get yourself a Stygian Vice. Stygian Vices can become expensive very fast. And if you are on a budget, you can get yourself a decent leather belt with you know, the life implicit, and you can survive totally fine off of that. But I would say that you should probably opt into getting yourself a Stygian Vice as soon as possible, because the added benefit of having a Abyss socket is massive. Your Abyss Jewel can give you the strength you might need. It can give you global crit and multiplier, which is never found anywhere else on belts. Insane. And it can give you an extra bump to your life. And surprisingly, a jewel that's kind of like this one that has life and global crit multi, surprisingly is very affordable. Okay, I could probably even get myself a way better Abyss Jewel. I haven't really considered upgrading my Abyss Jewel in a while. Even if you are on a budget, I think you can still survive with the Stygian Vice, and the reason why is because of essences. So this is a slot in our gear where we can easily get some Chaos Res, and we should, because it's very valuable to do so. I would suggest getting yourself a Stygian Vice that has a good item level. These are very cheap, by the way. An item level 86 Stygian Vice is 20 Chaos, okay? And you don't even need 86. And then you hit it with a Essence of Envy. This is the lowest tier, by the way. And it's probably like 1 Chaos for these essences. If you want to upgrade it and get a little bit more resistance, you can get a Shrieking for like 2 Chaos, maybe 3 on the currency exchange. It's essentially a very good chance to end up with a very good belt after you use maybe like 5 to 10 on average. Because all you're really looking for is a good life roll per essence that you use, and then something else. Okay, if you get a tier 1 life roll plus a tier 3 lightning resistance roll like I got, I would say that's GG, right? Because you're getting Chaos Res, you're getting a lot of life, you have an Abyssal socket, you know, call it a day at that point, right? Especially if you have an open suffix as well. So I'm going to show you exactly how easy this is with the emulator. So I've used 2 so far, and all you're really looking for is tier 1 life. And if you get tier 2 life, maybe you settle on that, right? But once you see the tier 1 or tier 2 life, that's when you stop and you assess the situation. Tier 5, tier 5 again. Tier 1 energy shield, not useful, unfortunately. Tier 6, tier 7, tier 3, maybe you settle with tier 3. I mean, it's 107. That's a lot of life, right? I would definitely settle, actually, because look at this. We got tier 3 fire res, tier 1 cold res. That's a lot of resistance. So this is a nice belt, okay? But this is basically the decision you make. Once you see a good life roll, you look at everything else and you think, is this good? Is this usable? Can I make this work? And to be honest with you, if you have a good, like, let's say that maybe you were really hoping to get a open suffix because you really wanted to get this craft for an extra 14% or 15% chaos res. If you're in the case of saying like, damn, this is really good, but I really want to have an open suffix. Some people might say, oh, hit it with an annulment orb. You know, maybe you remove this stupid mana recovery mod. Maybe you remove one of these and then you have an open suffix. I would say sell the belt. Think about it. you just spent like 5 chaos on the base, and then you spent like 30, 40 chaos on the essences. You spent 50 total chaos probably to get something that if you price checked this with chaos res, with this much elemental res, with a tier 3 life roll on a Stygian Vice, this would sell for 1 divine easily. Maybe even 1.5, maybe even 2, okay? So like in the process of making your belt for your build specifically, you occasionally will land on something like this where it's like, hey, this is good, this is not worth rolling over. You know, sell the belt, buy another base, and just go again, right? It's that simple. So we're going again. And there we go. Wow, this is actually insane. So we got tier 1 life and we got tier 2 strength. So if you end up with something like this, you know, you can forego the strength roll on your ring. You know, then you're in a better place to get some really good rings. And we also have an open suffix, so we can craft the extra chaos res and resistance craft. So this is insane. This belt's really, really, really good. But this is just an exercise to explain to you that if you have like 100 chaos or 150 chaos to spend on a belt, I would not look for one on the trade site. I would definitely craft it yourself, because it's literally the easiest craft in the game. It's essence spamming, looking for 1 stat. It's like so chill of a craft, and you could potentially make a lot of money doing this as well, and you could potentially make a really good item like this easily. So that's the belt, okay? Just to go a little more in detail here, what I did was I ended up with a belt that had a good resistance roll with an open suffix. I crafted the cold chaos, and then I noticed, hey, I have an open prefix. Whenever you see an open prefix on a Stygian Vice, there is always the possibility of buying a Hunter Orb and slamming increased maximum life. That's what I did, and I got lucky. I hit a tier 2, so it's not the tier 1. It would have been insane if it was. The reason why this is such a good idea is because it's actually pretty common for this to happen. If you take a look at belts on Craft of Exile, you can see that there's only 3 options. When you use an Exalted Orb, when you use a Hunter Exalted Orb on a belt that only has prefixes available, so if it has 3 suffixes, if you benchcraft the 3rd or whatever, and you're guaranteed to get a prefix, you are more likely going to get chaos damage. It's a weighting of 1500 over the total of 2750. So it's actually like a 60% chance or something to get chaos damage. But you have like a 30% chance to get one of the 2 tiers of increased maximum life. The cool thing about doing this is it obviously helps the build, but now that I did this and now that it succeeded and I won the game, basically. This belt is now outrageously expensive according to the technically like what it's worth on the market. You can see it's not even, this is a tier 2 roll. This is a tier 3 lightning. You know, this belt is not like insane by any stretch of the imagination, but there's none on the market right now. If I open up the page and I look for any, there's one for 25 divines that's similar to mine. If I become a little bit more liberal here with some of the searches, if I just go to 1 here, because it doesn't really matter. If I go to like 100 life and then like 36 chaos res and like 40 other resistance, it still doesn't exist. So this is insane. This belt is crazy, but it was really easy to make. And you can do the same thing yourself and either just make a lot of money because like holy shit, or just use it because it's insanely strong for the build, okay? Moving on, gloves and boots are next. So let's talk about gloves. Gloves is pretty straightforward. We're using a pure evasion base because we don't really need any more energy shield. I have the 700 mark from my body and my boots and other things. So I opted in to get only an evasion base here. This is a nice location to find whatever extra spell suppression that you might need. Keep in mind, if I were to have completely removed spell suppression from my gloves, I could have also just moved around my tree a little bit and I could have gotten some more here as well. That's what I started with. I started with all of these specced except for one. And once I got these gloves, I was able to respec, right? So spell suppression is nice to find on your gloves for that reason. And you can also get yourself a nice tier 1 life roll So look for life, spell suppression, resistance. It's that simple. And then if you're able to get some better deep defensive stats as well to get higher evasion, that's helpful as well. But I would search for, based on your budget, get whatever you need, right? Maybe you only get a tier 3 or tier 4 life roll. You settle for a tier 4 life roll if you are on a budget and you can't afford the expensive, perfect tier 1 life rolls, right? It's you gotta like weigh your benefits here. If you only have like maybe 20 divines total to spend on the build, you don't necessarily want to spend 5 divines on a single piece of gear that's not something like as obvious as expensive for a reason, like a Crested Desire. I would say that you could probably get a similar pair of these gloves for like 100 C, maybe even 50 C, okay? You just search for the conservative tiers of these modifiers. The boots, 30% movement speed I would say is the bare minimum, because we do have a lot of movement speed, so it's really nice to stack more. These boots are pretty generic. All I'm really looking for here is a very good life roll. I have a tier 1 flat life with a tier 1 hybrid life with 30% movement speed. That was my primary focus, is getting as much life as possible with 30% movement speed. Everything else is just like icing on the cake. I got suffix rarity. I have an open suffix for a little bit more chaos res. You know, you can obviously get more resistance here if you need to, but I would focus on getting resistance on your other pieces so that you can definitely ensure that you get as much life as possible on your boots, as well as a nice 30% movement speed roll. As far as your implicits are concerned, the action speed is insane. Because we have such high cast speed, because we have such high movement speed, the fact that we then get a 4% increased action speed on top of that, which is very easy to get, by the way, that is a greater Icker. It's so easy to get that. It's pretty cheap. I'm going to actually get that up later. I'm going to spend more money on getting that to like 6%. The action speed is massive. And you might consider like, oh, look, I just, like, when you're rolling to look for this, you might see like, oh, look, I just got movement speed. That's good. I might stop on movement speed, right? I promise you, action speed is tremendously more value than any of these tiers of movement speed. You're going to literally move faster with 4% action speed than you will move with the perfect 10% movement speed on your boot implicit. That might not actually be true technically, but it's gonna be very close if it's not true, okay? However, you will do a lot more damage with this, as well as you'll probably move faster, because this will make your casting even faster. So it's basically another more percent multiplier on top of your 50% more multiplier that you have from your ascendancy. So the last piece is the body armor, and this is kind of generic as well. It's just life and defenses and resistances. It's very simple. This is also obviously your only potential 6-link, because the fishing rod has an interesting little thing about it where it can only roll 4 sockets maximum. So you cannot get a 6-link on your weapon. Pretty big downside, but it's worth it for what we get out of the fishing rod. So for that reason, I have my Enlightened support gem with my auras and my body armor. The Enlightened 4 is expensive. It is 15 divines right now. Enlightened 3, I think, is like 4 divines. So that's a little bit more affordable. But even before Enlightened 3, I was running Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder, and Purity of Elements. So I was running 3 auras before I had any of the Enlightened support gems. And I was able to do so simply with all of the reservation masteries that we have on our tree and sovereignty on my amulet. Once I bought the Enlightened 4, I was able to then fit in Wrath alongside Vitality. Why is that not turned on? So I have Vitality, I have, all my auras based on my Enlightened 4. If you get to the point of having a 6-link for your auras, but you don't have an Enlightened 4, if you have an Enlightened 3, so if you have a similar skill tree or the same skill tree that I have, your mana will be different probably, which makes a small difference, but not much. The most important thing is if you have all the reservation efficiency that I have from the skill tree and from the anointment, you can drop this down to Enlightened 3, and you'll see that I'm losing, it's not gonna work. However, all you have to do in that case is down level your Vitality. and I was able to use a vitality level 13, which is still good. It's nearly 100 life regen per second, which is nice, and that was with an Enlightened 3. Okay, so that was like when I bought this for like 4 div. I then saved up money to get an Enlightened 4 so I could have a level 20 vitality. So that's the 6 link. That's the 6 link setup. But like I said earlier, the modifiers on the body, you want to focus on getting life, you want to focus on getting evasion, and you want to get at least probably 200 energy shield from your body armor. This is where I'm getting a big chunk of my total energy shield. If I take off my body armor and I drop down to 129 energy shield, you'll notice that when I'm casting, I'm then very quickly out of mana. And that's not going to work, you know. The build is suddenly a lot weaker if you're forced to wait for your mana to regen, right? You don't ever want to be waiting on your mana. You want to be able to cast freely at all times. So I would say get at least 200 to get yourself close to the 700 mark so that you can more comfortably cast without any hindrance based on your mana. Very simple. Something else I should mention is this is another piece of gear where you can potentially get spell suppression. So keep an eye out for that if you need it. But what I did was I just got a decent body armor with prefixes and good life, and I got some decent resistance that I needed as well. This is a very easy thing to craft, by the way. What I'm going to do eventually is I'm going to get a perfect Sacred Orb tier 1 base, the Necrotic Armor. I might even look for an overqualified one, depending on what that costs. And then I'm going to literally just hit it with a max life essence, okay? The Greed Essence gives you 160 to 174 max life, which is a tier 2 roll. It's a tier 2 roll, okay? You just keep doing that until you get some good defenses. You keep doing that until you get like a tier 1% increased evasion or whatever, or a tier 1 hybrid evasion energy shield. You know, you just keep spamming your life essence until you get some nice defenses, and then you look at the suffixes. If you got some good defenses and then you have some decent suffixes, call it a day. If you got perfect prefixes, if you have really good prefixes that you want to keep, that's when you do Eldritch crafting, okay? If you have really good prefixes from spamming your life essence, but you have really bad suffixes, you can apply a single lesser Eldritch Ichor, which will make the item available to be used by your Eldritch currency. Eldritch Chaos Orb is kind of expensive, but it's worth it for the power that it enables you to have. It's like 40 Chaos for an Eldritch Chaos Orb. What this will do is it will re-roll your suffixes. So if you have really good prefixes, chances are, if you have really bad suffixes, one more re-roll is going to give you something better, right? What you're looking for is not perfect suffixes. You're looking for suffixes that are workable with your build. Like for me, I don't even have good suffixes here. I have tier 5 cold res, tier 7 lightning res, but I have an open suffix for chaos res, right? This was more than good enough for me. And this is an easy thing to roll with an Eldritch Chaos Orb. This is like probably not even something you would consider to be good with a single use. You know, this is not something you would settle on. But if you only want to spend 40 chaos on a single Chaos Orb and you get this roll, depending on what you need, of course, I would say that this is totally fine to stop and to continue. As far as the implicits are concerned, like I said earlier, the implicit for crit multi-dispel damage is actually better than the aura effect. And then as far as the Eater of Worlds implicit is concerned, the physical damage taken as LA damage of any kind is really easy to roll because there's so many different versions of it. You can see here, we can take it as Chaos, we can take it as Cold, Fire, or Lightning. So there's 4 different versions with the same weighting. So this is really, really easy to roll, and they are all good because we have roughly the same resistance to all these different types of damage. And one of the biggest points of the build that's, you know, needs some help is the physical damage reduction. So this is definitely the best implicit for your build. We are not using any of the defensive auras that you might want to use for these implicits, so this does not matter. The only thing left to talk about is the skills and the links. And to be honest, it's kind of flexible. So I have my Frost Bomb in a 4-link. I have my Ice Golem, or sorry, my Lightning Golem, which is only there to give me some more cast speed, which is good. It's really, really good. And I also have Frostbite, which is the curse we use, linked to faster casting, just so I cast my Frostbite a little bit quicker. I can very quickly just spam my Frostbite key, and I, go right back to blasting when I'm done casting my Frostbite. It's very fast. When I'm beaming and I want to put a Frost Bomb down, it is extremely fast. You can see it right there. I just put it down in the middle of my beams. Boom, it's down. Seamless. It really feels like nothing even happened. That's how quickly you can put a Frost Bomb down with all the cast speed that we have. I have my Frost Bomb linked to Unbound Ailments. Increased area of effect, just so it's bigger. There might be a better setup with this. I haven't put too much thought into it, I'll be honest. In my fishing rod, I have Frost Blink linked to nothing because I'm not doing Wintry Blast, so it's an instant cast. I don't need cast speed on it. It's just a Frost Blink sitting by itself alone. That's totally fine. And then I have my cast when damage taken setup. I leveled it up to 5, and then I have a level 12 Steel Skin. This is probably better than Immortal Call, and it's probably better, well, it's definitely better than Molten Shell, because we would have, like, no armor. This is probably the way to go, I think. I think Steel Skin is the best. It gives us a little bit of an extra buffer. It also will stop us from bleeding. If we ever catch a bleed and we don't have a life flask, Steel Skin could potentially purge that bleed, which is nice. So I've already talked about the 6-link a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit more about like why we are using all the auras we are using, right? Herald of Thunder is giving us some pretty good base added spell lightning damage, which is nice, but it is also giving us the, effect of it shocking nearby enemies. Like, I mean, zapping them, not shocking them, but zapping them. Whenever we shock an enemy, which we do if we ever cast on an enemy. So basically, we are always shocking. So Herald of Thunder is always going to be proccing. Because we have guaranteed critical strikes in our build, Herald of Thunder will guarantee crit everything it hits, which doesn't do much damage, but what it does do is enough to freeze oftentimes. So there can be a situation where you're hitting an enemy on this side of the screen, and then there's an enemy that just spawns or something like right behind you, and instead of having, before you maybe you don't notice the enemy who's about to hit you or whatever, your Herald of Thunder can oftentimes hit the enemy before you even have the opportunity to turn around and hit them, and your Herald of Thunder will freeze the enemy. So it just helps the sort of quality of life. It helps the defensive layer, so to speak, of our freeze, by allowing us to also freeze things that we are not even attacking, because it's going to be zapping everything and freezing them. So that's cool. That's why we have Herald of Thunder. Herald of Ice is giving us a lot of added spell damage, which is good. It's also obviously our clear spell. So when we attack something, it blows up everything around it in a big Herald of Ice explosion. That is why we have Herald of Ice. Purity of Elements is something that I could maybe drop. The thing about it is nice to have a bunch of overcapped res, because we can very freely and comfortably click a lot of Eldritch Altars, which lower our resistance. We can also have obviously nothing to worry about on LE weakness maps. But the other thing is that ailment immunity is actually huge for this build, because ignites are really dangerous and chills are really annoying. We never want to be slowed down at all. So the fact that we can never be chilled means that there's not very many other instances in the game that will slow your cast speed. So because we're immune to chill, it's basically a DPS increase, like among chill situations, and we're immune to shock. When you have a build that's not really that tanky, if you're not immune to shock, it's going to make it that much worse. You catch a shock and then you take a hit, you're super dead at that point, right? So being immune to shock with Purity of Elements is a very nice way to deal with that, I think. Wrath gives us 21% more spell lightning damage, which is insane. This is like our biggest DPS aura. In my POB, if I turn this off, it's giving me like 40% of my damage. So Wrath is massive. As you can see right here, what I just did was I disabled my Enlightened 4 and I disabled my Vitality, and I can still cast Wrath along with my Heralds and my Purity of Elements. So this is all just coming from my tree, my reservation efficiency on the tree. I don't have reservation efficiency on any of my items, so it's all coming from the tree, and that's giving me enough to cast Wrath and both my heralds with Purity of Elements. So like, so yeah, you don't need Enlighten to cast Wrath, basically is the point I'm trying to make here. You will be able to have Wrath with all your other auras without the Enlighten. So the only other thing to talk about is my flasks, and I have a nicely rolled life flask with Corrupted Blood immunity, bleeding immunity, and I'm using a Jade flask, a Stibnite flask, Quicksilver, and an Onslaught flask. Onslaught's great for movement speed and cast speed, and then I'm just stacking evasion with these two. So that's the idea behind it. But you'll notice that I have the same prefixes on all of my flasks, and I'm using stun and block recovery, which is nice suffix, evasion rating, movement speed, and reduced curse effect suffix. This is just nice for like temporal chains, or maybe well, it's nice for every curse, but the only curse that doesn't matter is LE weakness, because we are already basically immune to that regardless. But yeah, the prefix is the most important thing here, because you know, a lot of times you'll have flasks that have the like gain 1 charge when hit by an enemy prefix. That prefix is considered to be like very valuable. You can sell a flask with the 3 charges like for a lot of money. This is actually giving us way more than that. Because we're critting so often, we are just getting so many crits so constantly that we actually get more charges. Like, we have charge generation the whole time we're hitting anything, so it's like really good for bossing. Like, typically when you're bossing and you run out of flask charges, you have to wait for the boss to like spawn ads and kill the ads, right? But we benefit from the fact that as long as we're hitting something, we're getting flask charges basically. So I would look for a pretty decent roll of this prefix. Like, this can go down to like, I think 15% for the bad tiers, up to like 30 plus. So I would look for like a pretty decent roll, so that you have a high chance to get a lot of charges. And I have charges reaches full on everything but my Quicksilver, because I like to be able to click my Quicksilver when I precisely want to, instead of just like randomly getting a bunch of movement speed, you know. But that's like the flasks, you know, pretty simple. For a little while, I was using an armor flask. I was using a granite flask, and then I kind of realized that it wasn't doing that much, and I'd rather just be a little bit more evasive. So I decided to go for the Stibnite instead of the granite. But you know, you can try it out yourself, see how it feels for you. And that about does it. I mean, I think we've basically covered everything. This took me a few days to record. It is currently Thursday, technically Friday at 2 in the morning. So this is like, at this point, by the time I'm uploading, it's past a week of the league. But everything in the video, all of the footage, all of everything in the video that you've seen was in the context of like within the first week. Okay, so just to give you an idea of like how powerful this build can be, and how, you know, if it looks fun, which I'm sure it does, I guarantee if you follow a similar setup, you will really enjoy yourself. And that's about all I got, so I really appreciate you watching, and I hope that you got inspired to try some Kamehameha, Crackling Lance, Surfcaster shenanigans. So yeah, thanks for watching.